understanding, there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different methods in which we can use courts and cases to kind of change the law around subjects that we find unjust. So things maybe like animal rights laws or things like that. So I'm hoping you could tell us a bit more about how you have used courts and cases and different legal measures to try and change the laws in these ways.
Okay, sure. Yeah, a lot of times litigation does go hand in hand with getting legislation passed, and you see that when when ballot initiatives are put forward. In some cases, causes that are opposite to progressive values, like Prop 8. You saw where the people who promoted Prop 8 wanted to intervene on behalf of the state to defend it, and that didn't work. So thankfully, but there are cases when you can really use litigation to really advance good legislation. One of the first cases that I worked on while I was still in law school actually was doing undercover investigations in farms that force feed ducks to produce foie gras, which is something that, it's so grotesque to even think that this even goes on, but there were a couple of farms in the U.S. that were engaging in this barbaric practice of jamming large metal pipes down the throats of ducks, pumping them full of massive quantities of food to enlarge their livers to over 10 times normal size. And so we went into these farms and documented the cruel conditions, videotaped the force feeding, rescued ducks, basically as a symbolic act. There's thousands of ducks in these factory farms. We took a few and brought them to sanctuaries and actually invited law enforcement or whoever to come prosecute us on the theory that the farm was engaged in animal cruelty and they weren't being prosecuted, and if we were to be prosecuted for rescuing these animals, that would bring more attention to the issue. Well, nobody wanted to prosecute us, but we did in California use a Business and Professions Code section, the Unfair Competition Law in California, Business and Professions Code section 17200, used to allow any organization or individual to bring suit against any business that's violating any law. So it was a pretty awesome law for environmentalists and animal protection advocates and anybody that wants to enforce laws that wouldn't necessarily have you wouldn't have a plaintiff or a client attached to it who's been economically injured directly by violation of this law, but you're just essentially bringing suit on behalf of the general public to have this law enforced. That was changed by ballot initiative in 2004. It was one of the Schwarzenegger ballot initiatives to curb frivolous lawsuits, and people essentially voted against their own rights and overwhelmingly passed this ballot initiative that eliminated the right to bring suit against companies that are violating any law, unless you have a plaintiff who has been directly out of pocket, economically injured by this violation of the law. So we wouldn't have been able to bring this suit after 2004. It was actually right around when we did it that the law changed. So we got in there. We filed this lawsuit for animal cruelty against based on a violation of the animal cruelty law against the farm in California that was engaged in this practice. And then they countersued us for trespass. And this litigation was pending, and then a legislative compromise was actually reached that allowed. It created a phase-out period, which obviously we didn't agree. We didn't want the phase-out period that would allow this farm to continue engaging in this cruel practice for 7.5 more years. But the compromise, the benefit for us was that the law would ban the sale of this product in California once the phase-out period expired, which is something that our lawsuit would not have been able to do. And this particular farm is only responsible for about 15% of the production in the U.S. And the main farm that was doing this is based in New York. And we wanted them to not be able to sell their product in California. So we went along with this, and the legislation, the farm actually asked the governor to sign the bill once it got passed, even though it eventually would and did put them out of business, and that actually just took effect July 1st of this year, finally. And some of our activists went back into the farm and rescued more ducks and documented more cruel conditions right before the law took effect to show this is still going on. They haven't updated their methods or anything like they were supposed to use the phase-out period to do. Of course, you can't make a grossly enlarged liver without force feeding, and they knew that. Everybody knew that. But the idea of the phase-out period was, well, if they can figure out some other way that it's not going to ban the sale and production of this product. But the law went into effect. The farm shut down. And then the farm in New York that's still force feeding ducks filed suit in federal court here in California and tried to strike down the sale component of the ban on the grounds that it violated the federal commerce clause of the U.S. Constitution, and also that it's vague and they can't understand it. And they don't know how much they're supposed to feed their ducks and all this nonsense. So the federal judge just last week, I think it was, denied their preliminary injunction, which means he's probably going to grant the state's summary judgment motion, and the law will stay on the books. And they've said in their lawsuit declarations that they're losing, like hundreds of thousands of dollars per month or something on all these lost sales. So that's great. They've lost a big chunk of their market share, and that industry is on the out. So I mean, that's one example where without that litigation, without the sort of the leverage of it never would have gotten out of the Agriculture Committee, and a lot of bills that have to do with any bill that has to do with agriculture goes through an agriculture committee in the legislature, and it's dominated by agricultural special interests. And you're not going to see the light of day for a lot of these bills. But in this case, because the farm actually wanted it, the farm in California actually wanted it because it protected them from our lawsuit. If we didn't have that leverage of that lawsuit, they wouldn't have gone along with it. We wouldn't have gotten the bill, wouldn't have seen the light of day. But because we were able to apply that leverage through the litigation, the legislation did go into effect, and now it's here to stay. And then there was recently a ballot initiative in 2008. It was the Prevention of Farm Animal Cruelty Act that banned cruel confinement cages on factory farms where egg-laying hens, veal calves, and breeding pigs are kept in cages that are so restrictive they can't turn around or move for their whole lives. Voters overwhelmingly passed Proposition 2 in 2008. It was something that had broad-based support, didn't matter what political party you were. When people saw how cruelly these animals were being treated, they were overwhelmingly voted for that. And that actually changed some of the workings on the state level with the legislature, so that the Agriculture Committee in the California Senate was reorganized to be the Food and Agriculture Committee and deal with issues of food safety and worker protection and environmental protection and animal protection, all this stuff that the agriculture lobby and industry does not want being talked about. But the politicians realize this is something that people care about, and politicians do care about votes. So that was a positive impact. Went beyond just the specifics of that ballot initiative that actually helped get other bills through the legislature going forward. I don't know how much time I have. Are we still?
It's about like a minute.
Okay, and so if we're still just talking about how litigation can lead to legislation. If anybody's familiar with the children's school in La Jolla, the seal rookery here in San Diego, where harbor seals give birth, nurse their young, right there on the beach. There was a lawsuit filed in 2005 to get rid of the seals and to force the city to remove them, and a bitter elderly judge, his last day on the bench, ruled that yes, the city has to do this, and they have to pay the attorney who handled the case $1 million. The whole thing was outrageous. But I filed a lawsuit in federal court under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which does not have a citizen supervision. So I had to allege, basically, I won't get into the legal details of how, the basis for how I was able to assert this claim, but I was able to convince the federal judge to at least issue a temporary restraining order that stayed in effect for about 8 months. And that it gave the city council basically the ability to stand up and say, oh, we're not just subject to this state court ruling, we want some clarification at the state level. And the state legislature stepped in and gave the city discretion as to how to manage the beach, and they, of course, voted to keep the seals and for better seal protection. Incidentally, I'm being prosecuted right now for petty theft for allegedly removing these anti-seal people go up there and put signs around, and they leave them, and it's illegal to post signs and leave them. So one of their signs allegedly walked off when it was unattended illegally. And they also have this big giant open flag that's like 20 feet, it's like one of these real estate flags, it's like 20 feet high, and it says open on it, and they stick it past the rope barrier. And the Occupy folks were prosecuted for having a flag where the flagpole is too thick. So I went down, I took the flag out, and it's got this big metal stake. And so I took it and I tossed it over the lifeguard tower, and first I called the police and they didn't show up for like 2 hours, so then I took it and I tossed it over the lifeguard tower. And they're prosecuting me for petty theft for that because I intended to permanently deprive them of their property, according to them. So I turned around and sued the deputy district attorney, or city attorney handling the case, for declaratory relief on where people can stick these signs. They can't be, so that's that'll be fun.